All right, good morning, everyone. It's just a few minutes after 9 o'clock, but I do apologize. We do have everybody here, so I guess we'll get things underway. I'd like to start by calling the Law Amendments Committee for Tuesday, November the 1st, 2022 to order. Welcome everybody here to Province House. My name is Brad Johns. I am the MLA for Sackville-Uniacke, as well as Attorney General and Minister of Justice, and I'll be chairing for the majority of the meeting today. Just prior to us starting, I will ask the members of the committee to identify themselves for the record, starting with the government side.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Melissa Sheehy-Richard. I'm the MLA for Hants West.
Good morning, Trevor Boudreau, the MLA for Richmond.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Kent Smith. I'm the MLA for the Eastern Shore.
Good morning, Dave Ritzie, MLA for Truro, Bobble Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Good morning, Ronnie LeBlanc, MLA for Clare.
Good morning, Braden Clark, MLA for Bedford South.
Good morning, everyone. MLA for Halifax Needham, Susie Hansen.
Hi, Gary Burrell, Halifax Shabakto.
And I'd also like to take an opportunity to recognize Ledge Council with us today. To my left, Karen Kingley, and to my right, Gordon Hebb. So with that, I'll run down a couple of the rules and procedures for our public hearings today. I'd like to remind everyone to please turn your cell phones off or put them on vibrate. Double check mine now. Also like to remind anyone who may be attending, who's here now or coming in later, that there's to be no cheering or shouting either for or against anything that's discussed here today. We ask for everyone to be very orderly in their behavior, and if not, they will be asked to leave. I'd like to remind everyone that taking of pictures and video are only allowed by the accredited media, and that presenters are not to use any kind of props when making their presentations. If a presenter has handouts for the committee members, we would ask that they please provide them to the page at the door for distribution. And also like to let everyone know that copies of all written submissions on a bill that have been received by email up to the time when the bill is reported back to the House or in person during a Law Amendments Committee meeting will be given to the library staff and posted online. Submissions received after the bill has reported back to the House are distributed electronically to committee members but are not posted online. All presenters who are here today were required to provide notification of the Ledge Council office that they intended on speaking, so we will proceed from the speakers on that list today. I would ask that when a speaker's name is called that they please come forward, state their name, how they would like to be referred to by committee members, and any organizations that they may represent. In regards to presentations, if there are 8 or less speakers signed up for a particular bill, each speaker will be allowed up to 10 minutes to address the committee. If there are more than 8 speakers on a particular bill, each presenter will be allowed up to 5 minutes. Either way, after that, we will allow committee members follow-up of 5 minutes for questions of the presenter. Once presenters have concluded their presentations, we'd ask that they leave the room if the room is crowded in order to make way for anyone else who may want to sit in. And I think that's it for the rules. So with that, we'll call our first bill. Our first few bills we do not have any representation today for. So we'll start off with Bill 223, Municipal Finance Corp Dissolution Act. There is no presentations. I'd look for a motion to close the public hearing on this. MLA Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to close public hearing on Bill 223.
All those in favor of closing public hearing say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. That's closed. I'll look for a motion to refer back to the House. MLA Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that Bill 223 be reported back to the House without amendment.
Motion to refer Bill 223 back to the House with no amendments. All those in favor signify aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Finished. Moving on now to Bill 224, Perennial Food and Agriculture Corporation Act. Looking for a motion to close the public hearing on this, and I'll go to MLA Ritzy, please.
I move to close Bill number 224, Perennial Food and Agricultural Corporation Act, now be concluded.
Motion to close public hearing in regards to Bill 224. All those in favor signify aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Look for a motion now to refer this back to the House, and I'll go back to MLA Ritzy, please.
I move that Bill number 224, Perennial Food and Agricultural Corporation Act, be reported back to the House without further amendment.
Motion on the floor to refer back without amendment. All those in favor signify aye. Those opposed, nay. It has carried. Thank you. Moving on to the next one, Bill 227, Financial Measures Act. I'll probably go to this one. I'll do MLA Boudreau for. Looking for a motion to close public hearing. MLA Boudreau.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to close public hearing on Bill 227, the Financial Measures Fall 2022 Act.
A motion to close public hearing on Bill 227. All those in favor signify with aye. Those opposed, nay. And a motion to refer back without amendment. MLA Boudreau.
Thank you, Chair. I move that Bill 227, the Financial Measures Fall 2022 Act, be reported back to the House without amendment.
Motion on the floor to move it back to the House with no amendment. All those in favor signify aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Thank you. That has passed. And our final one with no representation today, Bill 230, Provincial Lichen Act. Okay. And I'll go to MLA Sheehy Richard to close the public hearing on this one.
I move that presentations on Bill 230, the Provincial Lichen Act, now be concluded.
And a motion to close public hearing. All those in favor signify with aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. And if I could have a motion, MLA Sheehy Richard, to move it back to the House with no representation.
I move that Bill number 230, the Provincial Lichen Act, be reported back to the House without further amendment.
Thank you. All those in favor signify with aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. That's also passed. Moving on now, Bill 222, Housing Supply and Services Act. We do have 7 speakers that are listed on this one, so each of these speakers will be able to present to the committee for 10 minutes and up to 10 minutes, and they will have up to 5 minutes of opportunity for questions and answers by committee members. Our first presenter is virtual, Dr. Lynn Jones. Just waiting to see if Dr. Jones is there. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you this morning?
Good, thank you. We can hear you and see you perfectly. Hopefully you can hear us too.
Yes, I can.
Well, welcome to the Law Amendments Committee. My name's Brad Johns. I'm the chair this morning. Each speaker has up to 10 minutes to make their presentation to the committee. At the end of the 10 minutes, when you have a minute left, I'll let you know that there's a minute remaining. And then after the 10 minutes, committee members have up to 5 minutes where they can ask questions if they choose to. So I would ask that you, just for the record, if you could identify your name for the record, as well as how you would like to be addressed by committee members. And if you're representing any particular interest groups or committees or anything, if you would like to notify the committee of that as well. And then after you do that, I'll start your 10 minutes.
Okay, I shouldn't be too long. I actually thought it was 5, but I do have the gift to gab. Yes, it's Dr. Lynn Jones, but you can certainly call me Lynn. Just don't call me late for supper, as they say. And I'm not representing any particular group, but I'm representing all groups, if that makes sense.
All right, well, thank you very much, Lynn. Whenever you're ready, we'll start the timer. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me first of all introduce myself. It's Lynn Jones, doctor, as they say, and it's actually honorary doctorate from 2 universities related to my community work and activism. I'm an African Nova Scotian with roots of many generations from the beginning in this province. And I reside in two places, Halifax and Truro, my place of birth and ancestral home. I'm a social activist, long term, trade union activist and leader in the past, and many years, 35 years as a federal public service federal public service employee, and worked for many years employment equity and community um, development. I have many and much lived experience with the challenges of housing, particularly affordable housing, and I can go back to even the 80s, where my job with the Nova Scotia Association for the Advancement of Colored People, which is NSAACP, was education for housing for the Black community in the Halifax area. So I'm quite used to programs such as residential rehabilitation assistant program, neighborhood improvement program, cooperatives, I can't even talk today, including nonprofits, and have also gone through a period of the establishment of CMHC into a crown corporation. I presently occupy a position of chair of the board of directors for the first of 2 community land trusts in Nova Scotia. And our land trust is in Truro and called the Down the Marsh Community Land Trust. And it's receives its initial startup funding from the Nova Scotia Housing Corporation. And we just started the first of the year, and we have our startup funding that lasts till March. And the reason for that community land trust is because our Black community here is now gentrified, and there's only 2 Black families left in the traditional area of the marsh because of racism, environmental racism, discrimination. I am turning all my ancestral land that I own in this town over to the Community Land Trust, an initiative that I'm sure the government could be doing and could have done. But I found in order to try to save and come the community that I'm prepared to do that. And that's what we're in the process of doing it. I find it quite incredulous that I have this small window of opportunity to tell you my story and the story of the people, the marginalized people that have been erased and politically been disenfranchised from what affects them. I've never appeared before such a committee as this before, and I don't know all the parts of this Bill 222, the nuances and tenets, but I am well aware and trained in the concerns of people, particularly Black and poor people who suffer due to the lack of acceptable and affordable homes. I find this bill stacked with concepts and legalese that only those with a legal background could truly understand. There's not one mention of what I could see of real people in the whole document and their grave housing circumstances that they're going through. I don't think, and I asked the question, do you really concern yourself with hearing our voice with a view to make a meaningful change? And I actually think not. This bill perpetuates a self-interest, and that doesn't look at housing as a human rights or even mentions it as being a human right. And I feel if you did, that you wouldn't be introducing this hierarchy of power, which is what I see, that once the game will be governed by one individual, no doubt a white, able-bodied, heterosexual male who knows nothing of our experience, yet will control and administer our lives. And yes, housing is a central part of survival. And you might find this harsh, but it really does remind me of a slave system that we're all aware of that took place not only in Canada, but specifically Nova Scotia, where your relationship to the master determines your destiny. In this case, the minister. And your agency are all appointees that I could understand in going through the bill. And what happened to the system of by the people, of the people, and for the people? I almost felt that from working in government, that I would love to see an organizational chart of this, what you're introducing in terms of this new bill, because it would be pretty bleak, this organizational chart that shows how power and privilege really concerns us in housing. The problem, as I see it, is not the old system with the 5 authorities. The problem is that you don't really want to listen to the voice of the people and empower them to direct their own path. Hopefully, our Truro Community Land Trust will be supported by whatever system you choose to impose. And I trust that eventually the people will control their destiny through housing that's meaningful, affordable, and accessible, and controlled by and directed by the people that it concerns. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your comments. I'll go to members of the committee now for questions, starting with MLA Hanson, please.
Thank you, Ms. Lynn Jones, for presenting today. We really do truly appreciate your words. I have a question specifically about, based on your experience, what do you see from this particular absorbing of the authorities? What do you see anything positive, or do you see anything that would benefit those tenants or the families in these communities with this change happening?
I'll go back to the presenter, please.
Thank you for asking that question. And I think I've been very clear, and I've been around long enough to see these changes in systems, and I do not see a benefit. In fact, I see a regression. What now will basically happen is, and I use the Down the Marsh Community Land Trust. We've been working closely with Nova Scotia Housing to get started up and to move through, and we have direct relationship with the people involved. I see now under this system that there's more bureaucracy for us to have to make our way through, and the real concerns of the community. Those people want to know how our community operates, or who's in our community, or what we need in terms of housing. And then on top of that, you want to actually choose the people to sit in the agency. You may say, well, wow, then there's an agency that's going to perhaps have appointees from the community, but you will be appointing them. So it only stands to reason that you would appoint people that carry your agenda and not necessarily the agenda of the people.
Thank you very much for your comments. I have another question. I'll go to MLA Clark, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Lynn, thank you for your time this morning. My name is Braden Clark. I'm the MLA for Bedford South, and I'm just curious about the concept of a community land trust. I'm vaguely familiar with it, but certainly no expert, and I'm sure you are. So maybe for the benefit of the committee, you could kind of explain what a community land trust is and why, in your view, it's a good means to deal with housing.
Go to the presenter,
I am
please.
certainly no, sorry, I'm not an expert in community land trust. In fact, I don't think there's anybody, particularly in this province, that's an expert because we've never had one before. And so we're learning as we go. But one thing that we do know is that community land trust put the direction of the land and the ownership of the land in the hands of the people. So it takes it off the traditional market, out of the traditional market and into the hands of the community. So we're attempting to create affordable housing whereby the people or the trust always owns the land. The land can never be sold, never taken out of the hands of the people. The structures on the land can be owned by the people, but it's governed by how the trust is administered or the the framework of the trust. So why I say that in my community in Truro, which was the traditional Black community, and only two families left, by the way, two and a half. I call myself the half. Is that those people are gone through no fault of their own because of development and not having the funds to stay in their community as the community grew. They're all gone. I want them back, and I want our community to thrive. I'm hoping that other areas, such as we're talking about land claims in Preston, in Beachville, Yarmouth Way, that they will see this model as a way of preserving our communities. We don't have in this province means of really addressing the housing needs of the African Nova Scotian community. And we see this as a way of people doing that. Even the term affordable, you say, oh, everybody knows what the peripheries of affordable is. But if you use an Afrocentric perspective, our definition of affordable is not your definition of affordable. So community land trusts allow us to set up our own framework and and create our communities the way we want in perpetuity. So it goes on forever and ever.
Thank you very much. I'll go to MLA Burrell with a minute and a half.
Well, thanks. Hi, Dr. Jones. I just was thinking about the very first thing you said, that in this bill, there isn't anything to speak at all about housing as a human right. And you were making that really the kind of foundation of all your comments. That's an important thing. So would you like to say a little more about what importance it would be, what difference it would make to have legislation like this built on a foundation of an understanding and a clear preamble of housing as being a human right?
Back to the presenter,
Well,
please.
thank you. It's kind of like what we have. Again, I also what I said was I saw no reference to people in that document. Housing's not just a building. Housing is people and it's a community. And somehow or the other, the way we're going now, we talk about housing like it's a privilege. Housing's not a privilege. Everybody should have a right to decent, affordable, accessible housing. And if we did that with everybody, if we'd operated from that perspective, some of the social ills that we were experiencing in our society, um, will help to alleviate. For example, if we're talking about our prison system and things like defunding police and what have you, if a lot of these cases are people that don't even have places to live, decent places to live. They can't afford rents. They can't afford to. They don't see their housing as part of their community. I think personally that if we were going in the direction that we should be going in, that everybody, it's a human right. It's a right that we all should have to decent, affordable housing. I didn't, in my community, we didn't have that. And as a result, the people are gone from my community. We're experiencing social problems that we never had. And because the community has, is gone, people, we don't have the care and what have you that we had in our community in the past. I want to bring that back. I want that to return. And I think housing is the answer to doing that.
All right, well, thank you very much for your presentation and answering our questions today. That concludes your time. I do appreciate you logging on this morning and presenting to the committee, and thank you. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Moving on to our second speaker, Christine Sawyer. Saunier, thank you. I'm very consistent with one thing. I mess up at least one or two names per committee, so I apologize. If you could officially identify yourself for the record, as well as if you're here representing any committees or not, how you would like to be addressed by committee members, and then you'll have 10 minutes to present with a follow-up of 5 minutes for questions from members. When you have a minute left in your presentation, if you're still going, I'll just let you know there's a minute left before your 10 minutes. So if you want to introduce yourself, then I'll start the timer.
Sure. Good morning. I'm Dr. Christine Saunier. I'm the director of the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives Nova Scotia office. I can be addressed as Dr. Saunier. So I am here representing the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives Nova Scotia, and I will be drawing on a collaborative report that we released about a year and a half ago, and drawing on some of the 95 recommendations we made to address the housing crisis in Nova Scotia. I want to start by actually putting the people in the room. When we released our report, and since then things have only gotten worse, many Nova Scotians are without any place to call their own, living on the streets, in their cars, in stairwells, couch surfing, or staying in shelters. The numbers from recent homelessness counts are alarming. 697 in HRM, 483 in the Eastern Zone, and 40 reported homeless in Amherst. Many others are in housing and accommodation they cannot afford or are not safe, adequate, or properly maintained. Recently released census data shows that 35% of renters in the province are spending at least 30% of their before-tax income on housing costs. That's just over 47,000 renters. This is an underestimation given the temporary COVID-related relief benefits people were receiving in 2020 when the data was collected. The census also shows that province-wide, only 11% of tenants are living in subsidized housing, such as public housing, or in receipt of rent supplements. For other Nova Scotians, there is a lack of accessible housing that accommodates their needs to live barrier-free in the community like everyone else. Instead, persons with disabilities continue to be confined in institutions. As housing becomes even more unaffordable in areas close to employment, services, and amenities, it pushes many out of their communities, isolating them. We know the impact of homelessness and housing insecurity: increased stress, social exclusion, illness, and disease. It's also expensive, requiring emergency and patchwork responses for entirely preventable situations. Situations primarily created by government design, whether because of inadequate income assistance, low minimum wage, or lack of control over the cost of housing, as well as decades of underinvestment in non-market housing. An increase in overall in supply is needed, but the type of housing makes a difference. The government should ensure its investments produce as much public, nonprofit, co-op, and rental housing as possible. 80% of median market rent is not affordable for low-income or even moderate-income households, especially in our province with some of the lowest incomes and increasingly high costs, including rent. Non-market housing is the only solution to ensuring affordability for those for whom the market will never serve, because developers cannot make a profit off tenants whose incomes are so low. Subsidizing those profits is not the answer. One of the critical causes of homelessness and the lack of affordable housing is this government's lack of commitment to protecting and advancing housing as a human right. This act should explicitly state, quote, everyone has the right to have access to adequate housing, and further, that it commits to further the progressive realization of the right to adequate housing, and that it will develop measures to end and further prevent homelessness, prohibit forced evictions, address discrimination, focus on the most vulnerable and marginalized groups, ensure security of tenure for all, and guarantee that everyone's house is adequate. That means affordable, safe, accessible, located near services and not near polluted areas, and response to cultural needs for building community, as Dr. Lynn Jones just outlined. Importantly, having an act enshrines this right in place and would allow for accountability currently not present in the province and not in this legislation. The act would require regular reports to the legislature and a provincial housing council of lived experts and community housing providers. And it would report on the measures and progress to prevent and eliminate homelessness and core housing need. The province would appoint a housing advocate who would also be a member of the council and be responsible for assessing and making concrete recommendations in response to systemic problems that are brought forward by people experiencing homelessness, marginalized tenants, or organizations in the sector. The housing advocate could also convene a review panel to hold hearings. This act would be accompanied and must be accompanied by a housing strategy. We need to set a goal to prevent and eliminate homelessness and core housing need over a 10-year period. In contrast, what is being planned in this act further consolidates power, removing local decision-making, and includes no protection for low-income tenants. Indeed, as a matter of principle, housing policies must ensure that those most impacted are involved in its design and delivery. The involvement of tenants in rental housing is extremely limited in this province and should be addressed by supporting tenant associations as an example. The government must prioritize the participation of community housing providers for their expertise and experience. Cooperative housing is definitely a model that needs to be supported. It's democratic and provides rights and participation rights, voting rights. To summarize, to realize housing as a human right is what's needed. That will require addressing the roots of the crisis before us. 4 of those roots are the following. First, over the last 25 years plus, there's been very little non-market affordable housing built because of a lack of funding and leadership from this government as well, from the provincial government. This means the government must come to terms with the scale and scope of the crisis before us and the level of investment that is required. Second, the affordable housing that we have had has been neglected or lost to private for-profit developers and financiers. The housing crisis is marked by gentrification and displacement, fueled by the financialization of the housing market. What does that mean? It means financialization occurs when housing is allowed to be treated as a commodity, a vehicle for wealth and investment rather than a social good. Enacting policies to address this issue, including effective rent control and support for tenants' rights, is required. The third root is really the gaps in our social safety net that have left so many Nova Scotians living in deep poverty, whether because the income supports provided to them by government are intentionally below the poverty line, or because labor laws, including regulated minimum wage, leave people without sufficient income. On the other side of the equation, people are struggling because of the cost of essentials, including food, utilities, healthcare, and otherwise. These are taking up more of government budgets, and there's been very little government action. Fourth, it is critical to understand how the housing crisis affects populations differently, to develop responsive policy and ensure that access is universal. It's vital to take urgent action to address the lack of housing options for people with disabilities. And what about addressing the legacy of colonialism, racism, and enslavement? As Dr. Lynn Jones has underlined, community land trusts is part of that solution. This act is short-sighted and will do little to address the causes of the housing crisis because the approach remains rooted in a market-oriented one. This is the approach that's gotten us here in the first place. It's an approach that privileges those who have the resources to profit from housing at the expense of Nova Scotians' right to access affordable, accessible housing. It's time for the government to show its commitment to this right by incorporating it into this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. I would, just going to make a mark here, sorry. I would ask members of the committee if there are any questions. I'll go to MLA Burrow, please.
Well, thanks, and thanks for setting this out this way. Of course, the key word in so much of what you're talking about is affordable, affordable, affordable. But we have heard a change in the vocabulary, in the discourse of housing in recent months from the provincial government. This new word, attainable housing. And I wonder if you could say something about what affordable means relative to income, and what the difference is between that and the notion of the more sort of less precise notion of attainable housing.
I'll recognize the presenter, please.
Sure. Thank you. I mean, affordable housing has been defined through the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, as well as through Statistics Canada, as not spending more than 30% of your before-tax income. And that has been an understood definition of affordable housing as a peg to understand that if people are spending more than that on their budget, then it leaves them very insecure. It leaves them with very little to spend on all of the other essentials. And should other things go up, like food or other things, then they're making very difficult decisions if they can't afford their drugs. Housing isn't attainable if it isn't affordable. Housing isn't attainable if it's not somewhere near where you can access it because you don't have access to transportation. You know, we have to think through what is required in order for people to be able to access housing. As I've said, we as a province really need to take an approach that not only ensures that housing is affordable, that it's adequate, that it's safe, that it's good quality, that it's near amenities and services, that people can actually attain it in a real sense.
Thank you. Any other questions? MLA Burrow again.
Excuse me, did you? Oh, I was thinking too about the emphasis that you're giving in the discussion here on homelessness. The numbers you're talking about, in aggregate, not much more than 1,000 in the province. So when we think about housing as a human right, as you've laid it out, can you say a little bit about what difference it might make in how we approach the situation of this 1,000 plus a little bit people, if in fact we approach this issue, these 1,150 people, under the umbrella of understanding housing as a human right?
Recognize the presenter, please.
Yeah, we've underlined why it's necessary to not just look at core housing need, which is absolutely those who are trying to find housing in the market, but starting with those who are really without housing at all. And the reason that you start there is because those are our most marginalized. And if you're going to get at the root causes of the housing crisis, those people are wearing those. They're wearing them in the street because of our inadequate income assistance programs, because they can't access mental health services or health care, because they have fallen through the social safety net. Housing is about much more than just ensuring that there's more supply. That's absolutely part of it. But if we also don't ensure that we're getting at the root causes of why so many people are homeless in the first place, then we won't solve this problem in the long term. We need to really ensure that people have wraparound services and supports, and that's what our community providers have been doing, and have been doing their best to really provide that, through their shelters, through what they can. But it's not enough because of the underinvestment in the entire social safety net that's necessary.
All right. Thank you very much for your presentation and your comments. Thank you for coming. We'll call on our next presenter. I believe it's virtual. Nancy Lee. Hi, good morning. Can you hear us okay? I'm sorry, we can't hear you.
Oh, sorry, I'm
There
muted.
we are. Hi. That's why I always wanted to say good morning. Welcome again to the Law Amendments Committee. Today, of course, on Housing and Supply and Services Act. Just before we get started, in case you tuned in a little bit later than from the very beginning, I will get you in a moment to introduce yourself, how you would like to be addressed by committee members, as well as any organizations if you represent any. And you'll have up to 10 minutes to present to the committee, and then committee members have up to 5 minutes to ask questions if they would like to. So with that, I'll get you to introduce yourself, and then as soon as you're ready, we'll start your 10 minutes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So my name is Nancy Lee. I am calling to you from Tatamagouche. I'm the executive director of Tatamagouche Center. I'm also on the advisory group for Down the Marsh Community Land Trust, one of the first Black-led community land trusts in the province. And I was part of the working group for the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives.
Okay, I'll start your 10 minutes now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm grateful for this time for you to hear from the public. I wish that there was a little bit more lead up time knowing about it so that, yeah, I'll just say that. So as someone with over 20 years experience with finance, social finance, and alternative economic models, I've been working at community land trusts for a better part of a decade. And I see that it's made some real tractions in getting deep affordability as well as the wisdom of lived experience from community organizations. I'm citing Hogan Alley, a Black-led community land trust in Vancouver, and also one led by single-parent moms in California, just as two examples. We are, as you know, in a housing crisis in Nova Scotia, and this bill, this centralization, consolidation of power and decision-making, I believe is a serious step backwards. And frankly, I feel like it's a lack of vision. It goes against what we know about successful conditions for provinces to partner. I'm looking at across Canada, I'm looking at the States, I'm looking in Europe, and even looking at some of the most successful provinces, Quebec and Vancouver, there are three conditions: a bold vision of deep affordability. Number two, provinces are not the drivers, certainly not service providers directly themselves. They work and they facilitate and they support networked partnerships. They're a key partner, there's no question, but they do so in partnership with community organizations who know the highly situated, nuanced reality. And with the city, they align and harmonize policy levers. They do what they do best. They look for smart subsidy. They support social finance, legislation, financial institutions to come in as players, and policy levers. So I'm looking at these three conditions with respect to your Bill 222, and I see actually none of them really in place. So number one, a bold vision. We should have written in this bill, everyone has the right to access to adequate, affordable housing. Housing is a human right. Why do we not have that stated up front? Why is that not our driver? So I'd like to see something like Vince Calder had recommended from South Africa. The minister must take reasonable legislative and other measures within its available resources to achieve the progressive realization of this right. So that's number one. Number two, centralized models or drivers of this sort just simply are not going to tackle something as complex and entrenched as housing insecurity and homelessness. These are situated issues. They're situated in place. They're situated in intersectional realities that are compounded by gender, race, intersectionality. I have personally known economic insecurity. I grew up in a working class family. My brother lost his house. We've known housing insecurity in my family, and I want to know, will anyone on your advisory council have that lived experience, be able to bring that experience to bear? Something as central as the body that you're talking can't possibly represent the myriad of lived experiences that really have to come to bear, not only because it's important that their voices are heard, but for real solutions that are going to last. So the most successful examples, as I said, that tackling affordable housing, they're not single drivers, they are partners. This direction is working away from partnership. An advisory council, it's just too decentralized to deal again with this wide range of experience. And you're moving away from insights that can really support us. These should be networked solutions, and the province should take a bold leadership in supporting network solutions. So number 3, I believe a crown corporation is the wrong vehicle. For instance, there is a lot of emphasis on loans in your bill. I do see grants as well. But again, worked my whole career in finance and social finance. The market is never going to have the right incentives to tackle something as complex as housing. Again, why successful strategies have been networks, community organizations, municipalities, it's because they've been rowing in the same direction, aligning, seeing where smart subsidy fits, finding policy and market levers that can be applied. I believe that we can find a way to do this, but I do not see this bill in that direction. Just an example, the municipal taxation provision should include all non-market housing. Non-market housing as a focus is extremely important, but even 80% of the market is not affordable. So we really want to see a commitment to deep affordability, and we want to see the province as a partner, not a driver, and not the key service provider. So I will, yeah, I think I'll leave it there. I'd welcome your questions.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation. I will go to members of the committee who have questions, and I'll start out with MLA Clark, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Nancy, thank you for your time this morning. My name is Braden Clark. I'm the MLA for Bedford South. And you might repeat yourself a little bit on this, so I apologize. But if you could just maybe highlight for us a bit more. You mentioned that a Crown Corporation, in your view, is kind of the wrong vehicle, the wrong structure to deal with this problem. So, in a perfect world, what kind of structure are you talking about? What kind of role do you see the province that the province should play in something like this, so that we can actually deal with this problem in a systematic way?
I'll recognize the speaker, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your question. I believe that what we've had with more decentralized bodies, including Housing Nova Scotia, is more in the right direction. There needs to be a recognition of regional differences. There needs to be, I'm not saying that market levers aren't part of the solution, but for it to be based within a corporation as the one vehicle, it feels not diverse enough, frankly. I think you want a granting body. I think you want a research body. I think you want, and you may have a crowned corporation in that mix. But for all of the solutions to be under the Crown Corporation, and especially for the province to be, as it seems to be implied in the bill, acting as a service provider, acting directly, I think it's going to be very difficult for that body to be successful. If again, we're looking at successful examples in other provinces. So I would cite the examples of British Columbia and Quebec, where the provinces have fostered an ecosystem that includes support to credit unions, support to financial institutions, support to community organizations, support to homelessness networks, so a wide range of lived experience and voices coming to bear on the solution.
Thank you. I have a question now from MLA Burrell, please.
Hi, I'm Gary Burrell from Halifax, Shabukto. Thanks for this explanation that you've given, and I just want to make sure that I and we have got you clearly. So I understood from what you said, and as you've explained more in this previous question, your general sense is that a decentralized model is one that moves towards accomplishing the goals you've set out better than a highly centralized model. But is it also true? Are you also saying that this matter of rearranging the governance, rearranging, consolidating, and so on, the way that this is all delivered, that at some level this is not our primary problem, that this is a secondary issue when we look at the overall crisis in housing, that the issue of the actual organization of the housing authorities is not the primary matter before us. Is that something that comes from your analysis as well?
Recognize presenter, please.
Thank you, Emma Burrell. I'm not sure. I'm sorry. Could you rephrase the question? That what I'm saying about the structure and the governance is not the main issue in the housing crisis? Sorry, could you restate the question? I'm not sure.
I'll recognize MLA Burrell for clarification.
Yes, so we have, in the midst of this comprehensive crisis, we have this reorganization of governance. Are you also saying that that the ordering of governance is not the primary core of the crisis? That there are many, many things we need, and that the structuring of the governance and its centralization is not, in your view, a priority?
Back to the presenter with 1 minute.
Thank you. I don't think it is I think it is the wrong direction to address the housing crisis. I think centralization is the wrong direction given what we know about what works to tackle housing. We need an equally complex ecosystem set of networked partnerships where we understand where smart subsidy, where private levers, where policy levers, where community organizations and lived experience fit. And I think governments have an important role to provide the incentives and the subsidy that supports that kind of ecosystem.
Thank you very much. That was perfect timing with 4 seconds left. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come in today and presenting to the committee. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for listening, and thank you for your questions. And bye-bye.
Moving on to our fourth speaker this morning, Hannah Wood. Welcome. So just to recap, I will have you identify your name for the record and any organizations you may be here representing, as well as how you would like members of the committee to address you. You'll then have 10 minutes to present to the committee, up to 10 minutes. And when you're finished the presentation, committee members have up to 5 minutes to ask any questions they may have. So if you want to introduce yourself, and then when you're ready, we'll start the 10 minutes.
All right. Hello, thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Hannah Wood, and I am the chair of the Halifax Peninsula chapter of ACORN, which is an acronym that stands for the Association of Community Organizations for Reform Now. It is a multi-issue membership-based community union of low to moderate income people. And we choose issues to pursue dependent on members' needs, and that has overwhelmingly been issues of housing lately. I also serve on the national board of ACORN. I'm a small business owner, accessibility advocate, and hold many volunteer roles in the community. And I can be referred to as my first name.
Thank you, Hannah. I'll start your time now.
So I list these affiliations because I wanted the membership here to know that I spend most of my time, both paid and unpaid labor, connecting with community members and hearing what people need and want to see changed in the province. And that comes from mostly low to moderate income people, so I feel that this experience speaks to what we're here about today. When I learned about Bill 222, my first concern was the speed at which this is being processed through the House and the lack of large-scale accessible public consultation for a change that dramatically changes the structure and administration of public housing in the province and dismantles so many current organizations which have served us for many years. My second concern is how this change removes transparency in the process of land acquisitions and expenditures for what is being created and called the Nova Scotia Provincial Housing Agency in this act. These changes create a lack of transparency in the reasoning used to make spending and overall decisions concerning housing. Point 6 of Section 14 of the Act states that for the purpose of this part, the special account known as the Housing Development Fund, continued by the Housing Act, is continued in the department and all assets and liabilities of the fund are vested in the minister. And point 6, I think, is especially poignant here. It says, accounting with respect to the fund is based on the fiscal year of the province, and the minister shall ensure that the financial report is prepared no later than June 30th each year for the previous fiscal year respecting its assets, liabilities, and continuity of the fund. This only gives people an opportunity to review funding after it has already occurred, and to make a fiscal report from a minister put online once a year is not going to necessarily have a wide readership, nor is it a very accessible document for a layperson to understand how that spending occurs. So I have a concern that both will this spending only be able to be considered after it has already occurred, but that the mode that it will be delivered will not necessarily be accessible to most of the population. Any information the advisory board, minister, or deputy minister does not choose to publicly share will be, according to point 42, be only accessible under request to the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, which is a process many do not know how to undertake and that can be very costly if you truly want to get a large breadth of information. So that is point 44. The agency is a public body as defined in the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. For greater certainty, that act applies to the agency. So I may be wrong, but that would seem to suggest that any information not released would have to be ordered through a FOIP request. All information on the hows and the whys of public housing decision-making should be the right of all Nova Scotians to know and understand in a publicly accessible and free manner, as they are the most impacted group by it. My third concern is around who advises and whose voices are being thrown away and not considered by this act. According to Part 217C, all committees that existed under the regional housing authorities are dissolved. So to be particular, this means the Metropolitan Regional Housing Authority, the Cape Breton Island Housing Authority, the Cobequid Housing Authority, the Eastern Mainland Housing Authority, and the Western Regional Housing Authority. These are bodies that have served our communities well for, in some cases, many decades, and are made up of memberships from within the community with both lived expertise on these matters and who have been hearing from community members impacted by these things in their own region. So these bodies conducted their work and were at least partially made up from people in the regions they represent, and this locality of these boards does matter in terms of the accessibility of them to the community, that they be in the communities they serve. It's even on face value a more equitable and democratic way to receive information and advisement on the needs of the area, to receive it from those who are located there. Nothing in Bill 222 gives me any indication on the background or expertise of those who will be appointed to this advisory. The following is what is stipulated about them, which is highly subjective and open to personal interpretation. Part 2 of Section 35 states that this body will bring to the attention to the minister matters that are of interest and concern to the public or other stakeholders respecting subsidized housing or that are related to the objects of the agency. So that is quite vague, in my opinion, of what would be these concerns. This body of 10, composition and qualifications unknown, with no designated role for people experiencing housing need or with any lived knowledge of it, in the past will advise the minister, but the minister, according to Part 2, Section 33, Part 2, Section 36, says the advisory board may pass resolutions to document its recommendations to the minister, but for greater certainty, the minister is not bound by any recommendations or resolutions of the board. So that leads me to not really understand what the purpose of this board, A, of whom I have no knowledge of its composition, inexperience, or qualification to serve in this role, but what is the real point of them if they can be completely disregarded by the minister should he disagree. So this feels like a small body without very much power, as opposed to the many regional housing associations we have that are made up of dedicated staff who spend time in the community, listen to the community, and report back on its needs to the province. I think we should recognize that the bodies that we have not been doing a poor job, but simply have lacked resources. If you speak to people in communities, they like the housing authorities that they have, they do good work, and I don't think were this taken to a public consultation, it would be approved of by many. My last concern is how this change will politicize the issue of housing. Nova Scotians being adequately housed is in the true public interest of all persons who live here. There are, however, moneyed interests, both inside and outside of the province and country, for whom a high vacancy rate, minimal to no public housing construction, and an untransparent funding and approval system would serve. If there is adequate public housing, market rates would drop, and to ignore that this affects many corporations and individuals' bottom lines would be naive. Of course, the building of public housing affects the market and therefore affects moneyed interests and therefore becomes political. These, like those who need housing, they vote, volunteer, and give money to parties. Creating less transparency in this process and putting it in the hands of a minister with party affiliation in a role that will change only to others with party affiliation of a party keeps public housing completely in the grip of party politics, making it even more of a bargaining chip in the House and a campaign issue at election time. When really I believe, as I believe most Nova Scotians would agree, that this issue should be consistent regardless of the party in power or the individual in the minister position. Public housing construction and maintenance is needed regardless of the party in power, and thus these processes should continue at an arm's length from the party system and be advised on by those who know the communities they serve and have lived knowledge of housing insecurities and issues regionally. I would also like to second both the statements by Christine and by Nancy. I think they went into good detail about what the alternative models look like. I unfortunately only had about 24 hours to prepare my statement, so I'm sorry I could not go into more solutions as opposed to just problems with the bill. On a personal note, I think we should consider not only what will happen if we don't pass this, but what will happen if we don't, as Nancy suggested, get a grander vision about housing. Housing is health. Housing is literal survivability. My sister passed away July of this year while living in a hotel after many years of being unable to find adequate affordable housing in Toronto. And there are thousands of people living in hotels in Toronto, and we have people living in hotels here, as well as many, many more people living on the streets than we had in years prior. So these issues are truly life and death. They are our societal structure, they are our culture, and if we ignore them, we will have a society that does not serve anyone, let alone the groups we are trying to serve with this act. I also know that it is not the concern of this meet today, but I also have concerns that Bill 222, in combination with the changes to Bill 216 regarding Canada Lands and Crown Corps, would be an issue together.
All right, thank you. So I will ask if there are any questions of committee members, and there are, so I'll start with MLA Hanson, please.
Thank you so much for your thorough presentation, especially dissecting the act itself, because as we know, this is a rushed piece of work that is being put together and being pushed through at such a rate, especially the magnitude of public housing and housing in general, we really need to take a deep dive and slow down and think about how this affects every single person in Nova Scotia. So you did say you didn't have much time to come up with a solutions-based conversation, but is there anything off the top of your head that you can say, you know what, like, if I had a little bit more time, this is something that stands out that I would definitely want you to know more about?
Recognized presenter.
I'll say what I often say when I'm asked for the solutions in interviews, wearing my Acorn hat, that fixing housing in Nova Scotia is going to take a mosaic of solutions. It's not going to take any one bill. It requires both permanent rent control, landlord licensing in municipalities to maintain standards of both behavior and apartment conditions, as well as the building of public housing. So those three main parts are essential, but then I would also agree with Nancy that there needs to be more solutions that are diverse and original and unique as per the needs of those who need housing. So I think those have to be dealt with in a first-person way, but in broad changes, which would be entirely net positive. I would say the landlord licensing, the permanent rent control, and funding more public housing. We, as Christine said, we do need significant investment in public housing, and nothing in here in this bill shows me that there will be the amount of building of public housing that is needed, or that it will be as affordable as it needs to be. So those are some of the ideas, but I also agree in investing in co-ops and in more alternative and original forms of housing.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Going back, MLA Smith. Recognize MLA Smith. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Ms. Wood, for the presentation. Certainly well thought out, well researched. I just wanted to ask a question. If you've had a chance in all of your research to look at the Auditor General's report on the housing authorities from a few years ago.
I have not, I'm sorry.
I would contest that some of your comments are contrary to what the Auditor General had to say. So I encourage you to have a look at it.
All the information, I would still maintain that this change is not necessarily the solution to fixing problems in our local housing authorities.
Oh, sorry. Thank you very much. And I'll go to MLA Hanson, please.
Thank you so much. I will say that even though you didn't read the Auditor General's report, you are spot on with the accuracy of how housing and your experience based on your lived experience and the work that you do based on the housing of First Voice. And I think that needs to be taken into account, not just, you know, our higher level of what we see. We need to know exactly what's happening on the ground. So because you didn't see the Auditor General's report, it does say that it recommends highly an arm's length board that is non-political, that is not appointed and has any political affiliation too. So I will say I do appreciate your words that you said today. But my question was. Even, and you threw me off there, Kent. You did. Excuse me, MLA Smith. I appreciate the mosaic of solutions, but I appreciate the fact that you mentioned diverse voices and having originality and uniqueness, because it was also spoken by the other members. So I thank you for that. I can't remember my question, but I can ask you after.
Thank you very much, MLA Hanson. We only have 30 seconds left, so thank you very much for your presentation and your answering the questions of the committee. Thank you, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you all.
MLA Burrell.
The purpose of MLAs engaging presenters with questions is to elucidate and draw out and understand more fully what the presenter is bringing forward. It is not to argue or to debate or to contest what a presenter has brought forward. So I think it would be helpful if the chair would be mindful of this consideration with all of the interchanges in our meeting.
I agree, and thank you. I will. Thank you. Thank you very much. Moving on now to our fifth presenter, which would be Alex Stratford. And hi, how are you? Welcome. Just to go over the rules kind of again, you'll have up to 10 minutes to present to the committee. And after the presentation is done, committee members have up for 5 minutes to ask any questions that they may have, if they have any. I would get you to start by introducing yourself for the record, as well as any organizations you may represent that you're here for, and how you would like to be addressed by committee members. And then once you're done that, we'll start your 10 minutes.
Great. I do have some handouts as well.
Yeah, we'll get them passed out in just a sec.
Yeah. Put them there. Alex Stratford, I'm the Executive Director Registrar with the Nova Scotia College of Social Workers. I'm also here on behalf of the Nova Scotia Action Coalition for Community Wellbeing, which I chair. And you can refer to me as Alec. My pronouns are he, him.
All right, thank you, Alec, and we'll start your 10 minutes now.
Great. Thank you. Privileged to be here today to talk about housing. I have the privilege of representing the voice of social workers and our commitment to human rights, social justice, and the importance of assuring that housing is a human right. I'm also privileged to chair the Nova Scotia Action Coalition for Community Wellbeing, a coalition of community members dedicated to working strategically and collaboratively towards community wellbeing and a better quality of life for everyone. Social workers in Nova Scotia are committed to ensuring that housing is a right and recognize that housing is health. Stress from housing insecurity has a significant impact on our physical, mental, and social health, leading to premature death, chronic illness, and social exclusion. Ensuring that everyone has a housing-secure future is critical for the clients that social workers serve, the health of individuals, and our collective community well-being. I offer the following proposed amendments to the Housing and Supply Service Act towards these ends. In Section 2, the purpose of the Act is to improve and to increase the, I would add, affordable housing, ensuring that that is primary. I would add to this as well, in terms of the section, ensuring everyone has the right to access adequate housing. To Section B, increasing and preserving the supply of affordable housing. Add to this to end and further prevent homelessness. I would strike promoting more adequate and affordable housing for vulnerable persons and groups, and replace with ensuring that everyone's housing is adequate, affordable, safe, accessible, including proximity to necessary services, and responsible to cultural needs for community building. I would also add to Section D, developing, delivering, and supporting programs related to housing. Add for the purposes of prohibiting forced evictions, addressing discrimination, focusing on the most vulnerable and marginalized groups, and ensuring security of tenure for all. Section 3, and this will be the crux of my presentation today, is that we add to this meaning section Housing for All Council, which means an accountability body that reports directly to the Legislative Assembly. I would strike that the minister may establish any committee or council the minister considers necessary or advisable to act in an advisory capacity in respect to any of policies, programs, services, or other matters under the administration of the minister, and replace with the minister will establish a provincial Housing for All Council independent of the minister, which must include community-based provider representation and tenant representation, and no more than one for-profit developer or business interest. The Housing for All Council will serve as the key accountability body that reports directly to the Legislative Assembly annually about the process of non-market housing and measures to implement the right to housing. Allow me to take some time to explain why these changes are crucial to health and well-being and safety of all Nova Scotians. Let me begin by stating that poverty is a political choice, and eliminating it requires that social justice and human rights are central to the ways in which we implement and measure human development. Housing is crucial to the elimination of poverty. Currently, our political choices have allowed for the financialization of affordable housing market, a lack of protection for tenants, have allowed low wages and low social assistance rates, which deny a meaningful quality of life to too many Nova Scotians. On October 17th, the International Day for the Eradication of Poverty, I had the privilege of hosting a panel discussion on poverty where doctors, lawyers, teachers, nurses, and social workers stood together and called for a collective response to end poverty in order to reduce the stress on all of Nova Scotia's social and health systems and to enhance the quality of life for all. The global pandemic has unveiled the deep structural inequities that exist in Nova Scotia, the erosion of the social safety net, the deep racial inequities that exist in our justice, health, and child protection systems, and we continue to address the substantial challenge of climate change. We are called on to examine our core values and press ourselves to respond differently. Good public policy recognizes that challenges are interconnected, and political decision-making must champion policy solutions that tackle multiple challenges at once. Nova Scotians are struggling to make ends meet, uncertain about how they may pay next month's rent or power bill. Many are going without food or rationing because they have to use their only discretionary money meant for essentials like food and medication to ensure they don't lose a roof over their heads. In Nova Scotia, thousands are without a place to call their own, living on the streets, couch surfing, staying in shelters, or relying on emergency stays that lack security of tenure and that can end in mass evictions. Some are in accommodations they cannot afford or which are not safe or adequate or properly maintained. For others, there's a lack of housing that is accessible and accommodates their needs to live a barrier-free life. As housing becomes more unaffordable in areas located to employment, services, or amenity, it pushes many outside of their community, isolating them further. So many Nova Scotians are housing insecure. There are very little protections to support them to stay where they currently are as they face, again, evictions and rising rents, to find a more suitable location. Our response cannot be to punish the victims of failed government policy. These political choices have many consequences, specifically on the clients that social workers serve. For example, living in low-quality housing negatively affects mental health, and persistent housing problems are predictive of worse mental health outcomes. Cruelly, child welfare legislation in Nova Scotia defines neglect as the chronic and serious failure to provide shelter, along with other essentials like food and shelter. This subjects already marginalized families to investigations and leads to an overrepresentation of Indigenous and Black children in care. Or most tragically, it forces folks to live in tents, in unsecure, unsafe environments, and this has led to the forceful removal of those shelters. To be successful in ensuring that housing is a right, there must be a clear focus on rising inequality. I point to the data in front of you as a reference to this, but in 2018, the top 10% of income earners in Nova Scotia grew 16.3 times the income shares of the bottom. Rising inequality and the continued class divide between the rich and the poor has allowed the voices of the most vulnerable to go unnoticed, has eroded trust, and has increased anxiety and illness for all. And I note today that the first 5 presenters have all spoken about the lack of community voice, the lack of being heard, the lack of having the public who are affected by these issues be meaningfully consulted, contribute to policy that is going to impact their lives. This is a product of rising inequality. The lack of trust appears to be growing. Engage Nova Scotia recently produced data demonstrating that only 27.1% of Nova Scotians trust the provincial government. This erodes the social solidarity required to tackle large issues, such as the housing crisis, pits Nova Scotians against one another, fighting for resources perceived to be scarce rather than working together in solidarity for the common good. This is also the root of the rising radicalization we have continued to see in our politics and in our political discourse. Continuing on from this, if the Premier wishes to achieve his mandate of fixing health care in Nova Scotia, then housing and inequality must be a part of this strategy. Stress from housing insecurity has a significant impact on physical, mental, and social health, as I've demonstrated. Ensuring that everyone has a housing secure future is critical for the health of our collective community well-being. Currently, our approach relies too heavily on the private sector and the commodification of housing to increase supply. This will be a failed strategy, as supply alone does not impact housing affordability, particularly as housing is continued to be used as an investment to extract wealth rather than as a right to entitlement. The rapid expansion of non-market housing is the only proven way to ensure that affordability is secure. The market will never serve the interests of the most marginalized and the vulnerable, quite frankly, because developers cannot make a profit off of low-wage earners. Stacking profits through subsidies is also not the answer. There is a call to action here. Many of my peers and colleagues have presented the many flaws with this legislation. What we see as the striking flaw in this process is the power stacked into the hands of one person, particularly in our current environment. So social workers are calling for the democratization of housing. Our democracy is struggling. More strikingly, civil liberties and rights are being stripped consistently in this week in Canada in the name of political expediency. We've witnessed the rising influence of corporate and business organizations in politics. So what we would propose is that providing the Minister of Housing all the power to make policy decisions without considering whether this is deepening systemic oppression will lead to greater inequality. So the Housing and Supply Services Act must ensure that housing is a right and ensure that the Housing Council for All, an oversight body, can operate as a human rights oversight institution that follows the UN Paris Principles for Human Rights and ensures functional and formal interdependence to hold the minister accountable.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I would ask if there are any questions from members of the committee. MLA Clark, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Alec, thank you for your time today and for your amendments that you put forward. It's actually really helpful to kind of see in black and white what you're thinking about. And all witnesses so far this morning on this bill have spoken a lot about the structure and the administration of this new housing entity and how it will work, and I agree. I think there are issues there, but I also think, and all witnesses have alluded to this as well, that there's, to me, the biggest oversight is the government's, I would say, almost complete disinterest in investing, I would say, in affordable or public housing in any way. And other provinces are doing some interesting things. The new Premier Designate in BC has put forward a proposal to create a $500 million fund in that province to acquire rental apartment buildings, essentially, that are going up for sale that would otherwise be snapped up and then redeveloped for the market. So I'm just curious if you kind of agree with the contention that, yeah, we can talk about the structure and there are issues there, but if we don't actually ever put any dollars into the system, we can have the best structure in the world, but we're still not going to get anywhere.
Recognize the presenter, please.
Yeah, that's 100% true. Now, ultimately, we'll contend with that when a budget is tabled, but 100%, if we are going to solve housing in this province, many of the reasons we're in a housing crisis right now is because there has been a 30-year underinvestment in public housing and non-market housing. When the federal government stopped funding housing, provinces did not step in. This has led to the crisis today. The reality is that the market alone will not solve this issue. As we've talked about, the market's goal is to earn profit, not to provide housing as a right. If we are to achieve affordable housing, significant financial investment in the development of non-market housing is crucial.
Thank you. Any other questions? I will recognize MLA Hanson, please.
Thank you, Alec, for your presentation. I want to say your Section 3 amendment for housing for all council, reporting directly to legislature. Can you explain to me what that would look like and why it would directly speak to the legislature?
Presenter, please.
Talking about rights. Every presenter today, as far as I've heard, has demonstrated that housing needs to be a right if we are to fundamentally promote the quality of life for people in Nova Scotia. Rights are incredibly important to our society. What we know is that if we are to protect rights, that there must be oversight. Oversight is crucial to the fundamental protection of rights. In fact, this government right now is working to better protect rights through the creation of a Child Youth Commission. Fundamentally, those independent oversight bodies are crucial to ensuring, again, accountability, good public discourse, and again, that the rights of citizens are heard and actualized. So the form and function of that council has to be representative of the community. It has to be empowered to do that work, and it needs to report not to the minister, so the minister can avoid recommendations or not table what is being said, but to the legislature so that it can be discussed fully and robustly in the public to determine what is in fact in the interest of all Nova Scotians.
Thank you. Recognize MLA Burrell, please.
Then continuing to think about the proposal for a Housing for All Council, can you say a little bit about what might be some of the voices that would be heard and registered if in fact we were organized on the model you're proposing, which are not going to be given effect in the model that's being proposed in the legislation?
Going to the presenter with just under a minute.
Yeah. So again, what the bill is proposing is, again, a retrenchment of democracy, removing boards and authorities towards the power of one individual to make decisions on public housing. Last time I checked, the Minister of Housing probably isn't living in public housing. They do not know the realities or the experiences of what impacts the day-to-day and the quality of life of folks. That first voice, the folks who live and manage and work, have to be central in assuring that oversight. The providers as well are key figures in being able to determine how we implement and operate. And of course, we've given space for developers. The problem with our current move forward is that the developer's voice seems to carry all the weight, and the voices of those who the developer is impacting seem to be marginalized or ignored. Hence today why you have a slew of speakers coming out stating just that very fact. So that is what would be the makeup of it. Oversight and accountability, particularly for the most marginalized and vulnerable, is also crucial to tackling rising inequality, which should be a concern to everyone as it has such a fundamental impact on our politics, our quality of life, our political discourse, and we are trending in the wrong direction year after year. Entrenching more power in the minister continues
Thank you very
that
much
trend.
for your comments. I actually gave you a couple extra seconds there. I hate interrupting people in their train of thought, right? But it's to try to keep us on schedule. So, yeah, thank you so much, Alec. I really appreciate your time coming and presenting today. Thank you. We're running about 15 minutes late. We will ask our next presenter to come up, Joanne Hussey. Oh, I'm sorry, I only saw one there, but and Katie, I'm not gonna try Katie. Although I like the name Katie, I had two girls and didn't name either of them Katie, but I wanted to, so. Thank you very much for coming to the committee today. As the previous times and speakers, you'll have 10 minutes to speak and address the committee, followed with up to 5 minutes of questions from committee members. Just before you start, I'd like you each to introduce yourself and how you would like to be referred to by committee members, and if you're here representing any groups. And then you'll jointly have that 10 minutes, and I'll start the timer once you're done introducing yourselves. So I'll go to Ms. Hussey first.
My name is Joanne Hussey. I'm a community legal worker with Dalhousie Legal Aid. My pronouns are she, her, and you can refer to me as Ms. Hussey.
And recognize our other speaker, Katie.
Yes, good morning. My name is Katie Brousseau, also a community legal worker with Dalhousie Legal Aid Service. My pronouns are she, her, and Katie is just fine.
Thank you very much, and whenever you're ready, we'll start the timer.
Great. So we've passed around some amendments that we have put together. We won't be speaking to all of them kind of directly because we only have a short time. But if there are questions about them, happy to answer those if we can in the 5 minutes after. So I'll start by just providing a bit of context that I'm sure is familiar to all of you by this point. As of December 31st, 2021, there were 5,950 applicants on the wait list for public housing, and about 3,000 of those were seniors. And as of September of this year, more than 690 people were experiencing homelessness in HRM. That is more than double the number from this time last year and a 550% increase since 2019. So that's the context for this legislative sitting that you're currently in the midst of. And to the extent that anyone is paying attention, I think it is fair to say that they have been waiting to see the government put forward some sort of bold and urgent vision to address the housing crisis. And instead, we have this. As written, the Housing Supply and Services Act sets no clear goals or targets. It provides no insight into how the government plans to tackle the current and growing crisis of housing affordability in the province. The amendments that we have proposed would sharpen the focus on the necessary provision of affordable housing with clear goals of eliminating homelessness in Nova Scotia and affirming housing as a human right, as you've heard from many of the previous presenters. So the United Nations International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which Canada has signed onto, recognizes housing as a human right. And that right is defined as the right to live in a home in peace, security, and dignity, and includes security of tenure, availability of services, affordability, accessibility, appropriate location, and cultural adequacy. As introduced, the purpose of this act is to improve and increase the housing stock of the province. We would suggest that the government's role in housing must be clearly focused on improving and increasing the affordable housing stock in the province. Pretty sure that luxury condos will get built regardless of whether the government likes it or not, and those folks don't need your help. Bill 222, as written, does not include a definition of affordability. Definitions of housing affordability that use market price as a basis are not meaningful, particularly if Nova Scotia does not implement a permanent system of rent control. Affordability has to be understood in terms of what people can actually afford to pay. So the accepted definition of affordable housing, which we included in the amendments that we suggested, is housing that costs no more than 30% of a household's total income before taxes, including utilities. So for a single person receiving income assistance, the standard household rate is $686 a month. That would mean that in order to meet that standard, their rent and utilities would need to be no more than $205.80 a month. According to CMHC, the median rent for a bachelor apartment in Halifax last year was $895. This is why government must have a clear goal of increasing non-market housing, which includes public housing, nonprofit housing, and cooperative housing. The United Nations Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights has been clear that governments must regulate business in order to prevent investments having any negative impacts on the right to housing, including by preventing any privatization of public or social housing that would reduce the capacity of the government to ensure the right to adequate housing. One way that the government can do this is by exercising a right of first refusal to purchase properties when they're listed for sale. So Part 1, Clause 7, Sub 2 seems to suggest this as a possibility, but again is not clear about what the ultimate goal is. It is possible here for the government to commit specifically to increasing non-market housing and ensuring no net loss of affordable housing. I think listening to the presenters this morning, these are all smart people, and there is no shortage of evidence-based solutions to the housing crisis. Prince Edward Island has committed in legislation to eliminate homelessness by 2025. Montreal is using a first right of refusal to address the loss of affordable rentals. Vancouver requires developers to have relocation plans in place before new builds are able to displace existing tenants. These things are all possible here in Nova Scotia. As members of this committee and members of the legislature, you have the power and the responsibility to amend this bill so that it can put forward some hope to the many people who are currently struggling to find and maintain adequate, affordable housing in this province. I'll pass it over to Katie for some further remarks.
Recognize Katie now, please.
Thank you. This bill speaks to the minister selecting an advisory board, as we know. As the bill exists, the minister is not obligated to rely on board members' recommendations and would maintain full autonomy in decision-making, as my friends and colleagues have, I think, all indicated this morning. I'm here today to express my concern that not only would the minister not be bound by these recommendations from the board, but there is further no mention of required qualifications of its members. Who does the province intend to include in such a board, and what qualifies these individuals to provide recommendations on issues of affordable housing? The bill, as it exists, provides no clarity on these points. A board member should be legislatively required to have relevant experience and expertise to qualify for this board participation. I would suggest they be required to have a strong understanding of both the history and current state of public housing in the province, as well as a working knowledge of poverty and its many intersections. Such a board should include first voice perspective, again, as my colleagues and friends have, I think, all indicated, and in the absence of first voice representation, at the very least, representation from those with expert experience working in the nonprofit housing sector. For decades, countless Nova Scotians have worked tirelessly in this sector, that is nonprofit housing. These individuals have expert knowledge in the field, and such experts should be included in decision and policy making as it relates to public, nonprofit, and cooperative housing. What qualifies this government to not only oversee, but to manage all aspects of public housing in Nova Scotia without first legislating a requirement to consult with both those who utilize this housing with lived experience and, again, the experts in the province who have been doing this work? Public housing is one of the more obvious ways that government is visible in community, and it is the focus of a substantial portion of this bill. This is in stark contrast to the overall thrust of the bill, which is to move decision-making behind closed doors. The public has a right to know what decisions are being made on their behalf and why. The amendments we have put forward include the requirement for the minister and the advisory board to report to the legislature. Public housing, like all public services, should be managed in public. The bill states that the board are to, quote, and forgive me, I don't have the citation, are to, quote, act honestly and in good faith with a view to the best interests of the agency. I challenge this and recommend an amendment be made to reflect the true nature and intention of affordable housing in Nova Scotia, which, with respect, is not the best interest of the agency, but the interest of those they serve, and that is the tenants, and that is Nova Scotians. Thank you very much.
Thank you both very much. You okay for some questions? Great, thank you. And I'll go to MLA Hanson, please.
Thank you so much. I thank you both for your presentation. I want to say that, you know, in your experience when it comes to this particular topic of housing, and there's a number of amendments in the back here that like are really, really great. I mean, hopefully we can bring them forward in a good nature to be able to amend this particular act in the proper way, to give it some type of some body to be able to work with. But the minister did say that, and I was corrected, but I did look back, and the minister did say that this particular act, this piece of legislation, does nothing to change the wait list for people that are waiting on the public housing wait list. Is there anything in here that you see that may be a potential for some possibilities for this minister to create more housing for those that need it the most, that is affordable?
I will recognize Joanne, please.
I think the section that I referred to, I think it's 7, where it talks about the fact that there needs to be governor and council approval for sales of larger parcels. Immediately when I read that, I thought about the Ocean Breeze development in Dartmouth North. It would provide the possibility for the government to potentially intervene and actually purchase that property and be able to renovate it and use it as increased public housing or non-market housing stock. The difficulty is there are no principles or values in this bill that suggest how that governor and council approval would be used or how it would be applied. It could be that they would actually be fast-tracking Ocean Breeze to be sold to a private development company to turn them all into high-end residences, in keeping with, I think, what we've seen from this government in terms of their reliance on this trickle-down housing theory, that if we build big, fancy, nice houses, somehow that will free up affordable houses. So I think there's the potential to use that clause to increase public housing. I just don't think that we know from this bill how it's intended to be used.
Thank you. Any other questions? Recognize MLA Burrell, please.
I'm just thinking about the point you made about right of first refusal. You were talking about Montreal. So in this time when we're in such a heightened need for increased access, could you say a little bit about how a right of first refusal might actually work in operation to accomplish the goals that we're trying to accomplish?
Going back to Joanne.
Sure. So in Montreal, what they've done is that they've designated certain zones where there are what people would call naturally occurring affordable units. So we see a lot of these units in HRM, in Dartmouth North, in Fairview, low-rise, small rental units with maybe 12 units in a building that have generally been on the lower end of the rent spectrum. But obviously, as property values increase, as we see increased investment from outside of the province in real estate in Nova Scotia, these have become really attractive properties for buyers. When these go up for sale, if it were in Montreal, the government would have to be notified that they were going up for sale, and the government would have the first opportunity to buy that building and maintain it as affordable housing, affordable market or non-market housing. They wouldn't have to. They would make that determination. And if they choose not to exercise it, then it could be sold in a usual way. But what we're seeing here without that is that those buildings go up for sale, and then they are turned into pits and surrounded by construction fences, and we have 15+ people displaced who have nowhere to go.
And I'm sorry, thank you. With just under a minute, I'll recognize MLA Hanson.
So in one of the amendments, it also mentioned tenant relocation and assistance finding new accommodations. We know that in public housing right now, the minister did say that there may be 1,000 open from changing around with overhouse type situation. Can you explain to me what that would look like?
30 seconds to Joanne.
Sorry, Joanne.
It's difficult to explain what that would look like, but the BC model, Vancouver has a really good policy on tenant relocation that requires developers to submit those plans before they can get a permit. In public housing, I think tenant relocation is tricky and requires a real good sense of neighborhoods and community and a lot of sensitivity for the folks who have been living there. So I think that's a difficult one.
That was pretty great, 30 seconds. Thank you both so much for coming and presenting today. We appreciate that. And we do have, the committee members do have your presentation, yours as well as all other presentations. I'll make sure are forwarded to the appropriate ministers. And thank you both so much for your time. Moving on to our last presenter today, Tracy Finder. I know I probably said the last name wrong, didn't I? Thank you and welcome. So in just a sec, I'll ask you to introduce yourself and say your name properly for the committee members and for the record, as well as any groups that you might be here representing and how you would like to be addressed by committee members. You'll then have up to 10 minutes to present to the committee, and committee members have up to 5 minutes to ask follow-up questions after you're finished. So if you want to introduce yourself, and then afterwards, as soon as you're done, I'll start the timer for you.
Okay, good morning, and thank you for having me. My name is Tracy Pinder, with a P, and I'm the Atlantic Regional Director for the Canadian Union of Public Employees. And my pronouns are she, her, and I'm fine with being addressed as Tracy.
Thank you, Tracy. Whenever you're ready.
Okay, my comments will be brief. I'll just, by way of introduction, say that CUPE represents more than 19,000 working people in Nova Scotia, and we are the second largest union in the province. CUPE as a whole represents over 715,000 members across Canada, and we are the front lines providing critical public services to Canadians. In Nova Scotia, many of our members work in the housing sector, maintaining publicly owned properties, providing support to individuals and families who rely on these services. CUPE members see firsthand the extent of the need on the ground and know that Nova Scotia needs more non-market housing. Many CUPE members are uncertain about why this act is needed. Our members want more funding for concrete improvements, the units they support that people need in the communities where they live. However, instead of directing additional resources to housing provision in this province, this bill seems to be more about centralizing control for public housing in Nova Scotia. I was a bit surprised to hear that given the record of the current governing party, whose members were strictly opposed to the centralization of the health authorities when they were in opposition. As the government members often said, centralization takes control away from local communities and results in the imposition of arbitrary policies that ignore the needs of local contexts. In the healthcare field, centralization has looked like canceling local programs for cancer treatment, requiring people to drive hundreds of kilometers away from their home communities at their own expense to access the care that they are entitled to under the Canada Health Act. The kind of crown corporation proposed in this bill paves the way for massive sell-off of public infrastructure. This has happened in BC, Alberta, Manitoba, and Ontario in the past 5 years alone. These divestments have been slammed by provincial auditors general and international experts who find that transferring responsibility for social housing to external actors does not produce new affordable housing. In the UK, a recent scheme to sell public housing land to private developers to increase affordable housing resulted in just 6% of new units being offered for rent at a genuinely affordable rate. Public housing stocks in Nova Scotia are already depleted, and what remains has been neglected by generations of democratically elected public officials. Maintenance and refurbishment of some of these properties has been brushed aside when budgets are rendered. As with other public buildings, deferred maintenance builds up over time, quietly devaluing valuable assets that could have been preserved for the use of the next generation had they been cared for properly. Once you sell off public land, it becomes very difficult to get it back. When we neglect our public assets, we create a situation where the investment necessary to restore them to a better condition seems like throwing good money after bad. But in reality, the more expensive choice is giving up what we have. The research shows that when the market is the only force allowed to set the cost of housing, people starve. People end up on the streets. Average monthly rent in Nova Scotia is now higher than the average rent in Ontario, while our median income remains the lowest in the country. People here, including CUPE members, are suffering unnecessarily. They are the working poor. Because the government is leaving them at the whim of the market. Wages are not keeping up with the skyrocketing housing costs, and how could they when housing prices are rising 30% year over year. This has not kept pace with the increases, the general wage increases that have been negotiated for public servants in this province. We are in a housing crisis, and we don't really have the time for measures that aren't directly improving the quality or quantity of secure, affordable, and dignified housing for the people of this province. I am here as a representative of the Canadian Union of Public Employees, and it would be remiss if I did not speak to the concern that we have with regards to the amount of ministerial power that is in this bill. This bill allows the minister and the setup to reach into freely negotiated collective agreements and amend them. This is the second time this is happening this fall. When I leave this meeting, I will be going straight to another meeting where the government and the Department of Education have also devised a scheme whereby childcare workers and their negotiated collective agreements will become something that is, again, touched by the government, and where the government is going to be reaching into those collective agreements to amend them. This bill will do the same thing. Collective agreement bargaining is a charter-protected right, and this government is moving forward with an agenda that favors for-profit business over that of the working poor. And we would like to see that the government rethink some of the things that they've had in these, and my learned colleagues who have spoken before me have raised those before you, and I ask that you strongly consider those amendments.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I will go to members of committee who have questions, starting with MLA Hanson, please.
Thank you so much for your presentation, and I'm grateful for your insight and some of the things that sometimes we don't always see when it comes to looking at an act. I appreciated all of the presentations with a deeper dive and dissecting that, and I'm thankful at the fact that you mentioned the charter protected right and the reach and the overreach. I will say this, I'm very concerned as well, and I would like to ask about your QP members. Are they worried about possible job loss? Are they worried about, movement that may take them away from their own communities within their own job description? I'm just curious to know.
Recognized speaker, please.
Well, at this time, all of this is very unknown with regards to movement and how they'll be shuffled. But with the creation of this new entity, there will be 2 unions involved, the NSG, EU, and QP. And so all of those folks who have their own negotiated collective agreements will be moved into one entity. And so it won't be something that the government will find sustainable to have competing members working side by side who are governed by different terms and working conditions. And so within the new entity, there will have to be something put in place in order to bring all of those people under one collective agreement. The other piece to that is that all of those members may not be working with that new entity, and we understand that some of those members will be moved to working directly for the government and become part of the civil service.
Thank you. Any other questions? Recognizing MLA Burrell.
Hi, thanks for this explanation, and I particularly appreciate the focus on the quality of the public housing stock, and how for the members of the union who are working with the housing stock, how this is a real concern. And we know it's a concern everywhere you go in Nova Scotia, that when we talk about public housing, sometimes we're talking about adequately looked after places, but very often we're looking at the kinds of neglect that you're discussing. Do you think it would be helpful in this kind of legislation if there were actually legislated a standard of care and maintenance and level of investment, so that we couldn't ever again get in the place where we are now, where public housing has been so systemically neglected for so long?
Recognized speaker.
Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the, you've heard it already this morning. I mean, housing is a fundamental right. And so in order for that right to be enacted, we need to have sustainable, affordable housing. And we would need to see something in place that would allow for that. This bill does none of that.
Any other questions? MLA Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will say as well that you did mention that most of the employees are like the working poor. They are actually, you know, some of them are not far off from living in public housing themselves. So on top of that, and we've heard of the number of reasons, i.e., like, you know, cost of living, they need to get paid better wages, all of these things. Within this particular act, do you think that it had any consult or any information sharing from the people that actually work there, or from, you know, maybe the tenants, to be able to be inserted in this particular bill? Did you see that, or did you hear that from any of your workers, that they had input in this act?
Recognized presenter.
No, in fact, it was quite the opposite. We had members that were very concerned because they had heard rumors that legislation was coming, yet were not consulted and didn't understand what that legislation might look like and how they would be directly impacted, as this bill will directly impact their lives.
All right, thank you. That concludes your time. I thank you for coming in and presenting to us today. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of the day. So just before, that does conclude all our presenters, committee members. So before, I do know that we do have a few amendments. Before we do that, I'm going to look for a motion to close the public hearing. And then if there are amendments to come forward, we'll do that once the public hearing portion of this is concluded. I'll recognize MLA Smith, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to close public presentations on Bill 222.
We have a motion to close the public participation portion of this bill. So moved. All those in favor signify with aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Public hearing is now closed. We will now go for to recognize MLA Burrell, please.
Is it in order, Mr. Chair, for me to move for a 5-minute break before we move to the amendments?
We can break for 5 minutes. I recognize the NDP may have a couple of amendments they'd like to bring forward, so we'll take a 5-minute, or say 10-minute break, be back here at 10 after 11. They're coming, yeah. They'll distribute, the clerks will distribute. Thank you. All right, thank you, everyone. We'll call things back to order, and we do have a number of amendments in front of us labeled NAC NDP 1, and I will go to MLA Burrell to introduce these, please.
Thank you. So on the amendment sheet that we've introduced, looking first at Clause 2, propose A, delete, improve, and increase the housing stock of the province in line 1. The substitute, recognize that the right to adequate housing is a fundamental right affirmed in international law, and to improve and increase the affordable housing stock of the province. And Mr. Chair, shall I just move through the Clause 2 ABCs and speak to them together?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
thanks. Then B, to add the word affordable, so that the construction in that sentence is affordable housing. And C, add after paragraph A in Clause 2 at B, exercising right of first refusal to purchase property, including land and built structures for use as affordable housing. So I want to say about these amendments, first, that we have heard from a series of presenters. I make it that Dr. Jones and Dr. Saunier and Nancy Lee and Alex Stratford all had spoken, perhaps others as well, about the importance for this bill being built on a foundation of an understanding of housing as a human right. So the effect of this would be to establish that in the place of a, so to say, preamble. Then turning to B, we've heard about how important it is that this whole edifice of legislation be built on an understanding of affordable housing. So this amendment would make the discussion here of housing be a discussion of affordable housing. And then thirdly, we have heard about the right of first refusal and the important role that it could play in increasing the stock of affordable housing. And so I move these amendments.
So for clarification, MLA Burrell, did you want to, so you'd like to go through each clause independently, or?
If that's suitable to you.
Okay. Just, I'm okay with that. Okay. Typically, I believe we have each amendment has its individual change sheet. So I just wanted to see how it was you wanted to go. So I'm okay with that. So we do have a motion on the floor at the moment. All those in favor signify with aye. Those opposed, nay. Nay. And we'll come back to MLA Burrell for the second amendment, please.
Then at Clause 3, adding after paragraph A, at B, affordable housing means housing that costs no more than 30% of a household's total income before taxes, including utilities. I'll just say about this that we've heard a number of discussions this morning about the importance of affordable housing being defined relative to income rather than to market pricing, and this amendment is intended to speak to that concern.
Thank you, MLA Burrell. So we do have a motion on the floor. Those in favor, aye. Those opposed, nay. Nay. Back to MLA Burrell, please.
Thank you. And then after Clause 6, to add at 7, the minister shall, to carry out the purpose of this act, recognize that the right to adequate housing is a fundamental human right affirmed in international law. B, take progressive action to realize the right to housing within a reasonable time. C, recognize the importance of publicly owned and other non-market housing and commit to increasing the overall share of such housing. And D, set to and publicly report annually on specific timelines and targets. So I move this.
Thank you, MLA Burrell. Motion on the floor. Those in favor? Those opposed? Nay. Thank you. And I'll go to MLA Hanson for the next one, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to, for us to take a look at page 3, subclause 7, 2. Delete and substitute the following subclauses. 2, an acquisition or disposal of any estate or interest in real property that exceeds 25 acres in a single transaction must be approved by the Governor and Council with the goal of ensuring no net loss of affordable housing. 3, where a transaction is approved under the subsection 2 and includes purpose-built rental housing buildings with rental units above commercial spaces, multiple conversion dwellings with 5 or more units, or nonprofit social and cooperative housing. The parties to the transaction must provide the minister with a tenant relocation plan. 4, a tenant relocation plan under subsection 3 must include A, a letter sent by the parties to all tenants outlining the proposed project and expected time. B, a mandatory meeting at the outset of the project with the parties and tenants. C, a plan for ongoing communication regarding the progress of the development and the tenant relocation process at key milestones. D, financial compensation provided based on length of tenancy, which may take the form of free rent, a lump sum payment, or combined of both. E, arrangement at the choice of the tenant for an insured moving company or flat rate payout for moving expenses. F, assistance finding new accommodations. G, a right of first refusal for existing tenants to move back into new building or buildings with a 20% discount off starting market rents or at the non-market rents in circumstances where the replacement unit is social housing. And H, an interim and final tenant relocation report. 5, a tenant relocation plan must be made publicly available in an accessible format. So this is put forward based on a number of conversations that were had today about transparency and accountability, but also in the vein of public housing tenants and other tenants that may have trouble finding housing when a property or real estate is sold off. So and the concern of selling off of property that is public housing, as we know, and I can speak for Halifax Needham, we have a number of public housing units that are on prime property that are also becoming gentrified, that are also within the heart of the city, and we want to either stop that from happening, i.e. selling off of prime real estate, and as well, if that is the case, based on whatever gamut of processes that happens, we want to make sure that the tenants have the opportunity to be relocated in a proper manner with all of the accommodations above. So that is my amendment in this particular time.
Thank you, MLA. So we do have a motion. I would ask to vote now. All those in favor signify aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Nay. Thank you. And we'll move to the next one, back to
Then that clause.
Oh, I'm sorry. So that clause has also failed. We'll move on back to MLA Burrow, please.
Then at clause 10, adding subclauses 1 and 2, any committee or council established by the minister under subsection 1 must include nonprofit housing organizations, nonprofit housing service providers, and individuals with lived experience of homelessness or housing insecurity. And adding then also 3, by March 31st of each year, any committee or council established by the minister under sub 1 must provide an annual report to be tabled in the assembly if the assembly is then sitting, or when the assembly is not then sitting, within 15 days of its next sitting. The purpose of these amendments is to address the concerns that we've heard expressed in a number of ways this morning about having a multiplicity of voices at these tables, and that voices of, in particular, of experience in this field and of lived experience not be marginalized or excluded. And so I move this.
Thank you, MLA. Question. All those in favor signify aye. Those opposed, nay. That has failed. We'll move on to the next one. Back to MLA Hanson, please.
Thank you. I'd look at the act on page 6, clause 21. Add accessible immediately after safe in paragraph A. B, delete subsidized in paragraph A and substitute affordable. And C, delete subsidized in paragraph C and substitute affordable. And I will continue on with the next ones, but I'm just going to speak to this one. as was spoke about today, clarification and clarity on a number of pieces within this act that is actually, it's non-existent within the particular act. So we want to be able to give you, to give Nova Scotians an understanding of what this means within this particular act.
Thank you, MLA. So we have a question on the floor. Once again, all those in favor signify aye. Those opposed, nay. Nay. That one is also failed. I hate the word failed. Not passed. Defeated. That's better. Thank you. And I'll go back to MLA Hanson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Page 7, paragraph 22, 1G, delete and substitute the following paragraph. Delivering public housing programs consistent with the recognition that the right to adequate housing is a fundamental human right affirmed in international law. And I mean, that just says exactly what it is. I mean, we've talked about it a number of times, but it was mentioned here on every single presentation that we need to recognize housing as a human right.
Thank you, MLA. All those in favor signify aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Nay. That has been defeated. We'll move to, doesn't sound much better, to be honest, does it? No. We'll move to your next one. That would be MLA Hanson as well, please.
We'll move to page 8, subclause 27.1, add, and must include representatives from nonprofit housing organizations, nonprofit housing service providers, and individuals with lived experience of homelessness or housing insecurity immediately after council.
Thank
And
you.
There's another clause to that. Clause 27 on page 8, add immediately after subclause 2 the following subclause. Number 3, by March 31st of each year, the advisory board must provide an annual report to be tabled in the assembly if the assembly is then sitting or where the assembly is not then sitting within 15 days of the next sitting.
Thank you. Motion on the floor. All those in favor, aye. All those opposed, nay. Nay. Defeated. So what I will, before I recognize MLA Burrell, as with the presentations, I will ensure that these amendments are forwarded to the minister so that they can be reviewed, and they may be an opportunity to incorporate some of them. So I think it's important to do that. I would recognize MLA Burrell, please.
When it is in order, Mr. Chair, I would like to make a motion about the disposition of the bill, but I'll wait for your advice about when it is in order to do that.
So I think we've completed all business, so I'll turn the floor to MLA Burrell for a moment.
I move that Bill 222, the Housing Supply and Services Act, be returned to the department for improvement and reconsideration.
We have a motion to refer Bill 222 back to the department for reconsideration. Is there any discussion on that? I'll recognize MLA Smith.
Thank you. I'll speak a little bit to that motion. We're not going to support that. I don't want to come across that we don't care about housing, that we don't recognize the importance of housing for Nova Scotians. We do. Those suggestions, though, they go beyond the scope of this particular bill. This particular bill is really in response to the AG's report on the quality of work that was being done with the Housing Authority. So if any of you had a chance to read it, Emily Hanson, I believe you had a chance to read it, not a good report, right? So there was actions in there that needed to be taken. This is the first step in taking those actions, you know? And there's talk about adding supply to the public housing. We aren't doing a good enough job managing the housing that we have right now. So before we add more, we need to get a grip on the housing that we have, manage it more efficiently, more effectively, take some accountability, and that's what the minister is doing, taking the accountability to say, I'm going to make sure that this is looked after, and the buck stops with the minister, and it's going to with response to this bill. So again, please don't think that we don't care about the housing situation. We do. You'll see that we're taking steps to increase the supply, which is really at the crux of the issue. So with those words, I'll say we're not going to support the motion to send it back to the department, but we care about the housing situation.
Thank you. Thank you. And I will go to MLA Hanson, please.
I just wanted to say, and I truly believe that that is not the case. But I also want to say that, you know, proof is in the pudding. Like when we see things that come forward without any accountability, without any clarification, without any actual like wording on saying that that's what's going to happen, then I'm sorry, but that's why these questions come about and the amendments come forward based on the fact that there isn't clarity and there isn't actual wording that states that that's exactly what's going to happen. So I appreciate the member, you know, across from to say that, because I do believe that, but unfortunately within the act, the legislation itself doesn't say that. And we want to make sure, this is why the amendments are coming forward, that it does state that that's exactly what the plan is, to be able to make sure that we have affordability for all Nova Scotians when it comes to housing, and public housing in particular, only because public housing has been left, as we heard earlier, left to fend for themselves for a number of years, and not by any of, you know, this government's hands right now, but I will say that it doesn't state that there's going to be anything really concrete done to that within this particular bill. And this is housing and supply, and public housing is being consolidated and absorbed. So that's why I say this in that spirit, but I will say that it needs to be in legislature to say that that is exactly the plan that this government will be doing moving forward.
Thank you for your comments, MLA. And as I said, I personally find it very helpful when amendments come forward here that can be forwarded to the department and reviewed, hopefully before Committee of the Whole House and third reading. So, any other debate on this? So we do have a motion then to refer back to the committee, or back to staff for review, to the department. All those in favor of that motion, please signify with aye. Those opposed, nay. Nay. And that has been defeated. I'm sorry. I'll recognize MLA Smith, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At this time, I'd like to move that Bill 222 be referred back to the House without amendment.
We have a motion to refer Bill 222, Housing Supply and Services Act, back to the House without amendment. All those in favor signify aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Nay. And that is passed. And I think that concludes our business. Thank you, everyone, for another productive meeting. And as I said, I'll ensure these get to the right departments. Thank you, everyone. See you at 1 o'clock.